The new United States of America is the successor state to the United States of America that emerged sometime between the end of the Fourth Corporate War and 2040, when President Elizabeth Kress restructured the states that were still under federal government control. Total economic, social, and political breakdown of the original United States had begun with the crash of '94, and resulted in the disintegration of American society and its standing as a world superpower over the next 2 decades. The subsequent years would come to be known as the collapse, and would see the deaths of millions of people as a result of plagues, mutated viruses, terrorist attacks, and complete ecological collapse. The disintegration of NATO and the hardline foreign policy pursued by the Gang of Four isolated the United States politically and economically, with trade wars increasing the suffering of the American people. The complete destruction of the American economic, political, and social fabric was irreversible. Overburdened by debt, homelessness, and corruption, many bankrupted city governments turned to corporations to take control of governmental functions and public services. The signs of the slumbering problems were already evident in the 1980s. During this time, most social norms had started imploding under an all-engulfing wave of competing special interest groups, media-fueled fads, and an overall me-first worldview. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 marked the end of the Cold War, but conflict soon resumed with the start of the First Central American War in 1990. This prompted the U.S. to engage in interventionist actions in Panama, Nicaragua, Honduras, and El Salvador, and send military forces to secure the Panama Canal Zone. In 1992, a treaty was signed that established the European Economic Community and created the Eurodollar. The United States declined to enter in what some called paranoid isolationism. Over the next few years, the EEC implemented tariffs and engaged in unfair trade practices that negatively impacted the American economy, which prompted the U.S. to engage in the anti-EEC Quiet War. That same year, in an attempt to end the war on drugs, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency spread several designer plagues worldwide, targeting coca and opium plants. The governments of Chile and Ecuador soon collapsed, and a savage drug war erupted between Euro-backed dealers and the DEA across the Americas. Protests against the war resulted in rioting in major U.S. cities. This conflict culminated when Colombian drug cartels detonated a small tactical nuclear device in New York City, killing thousands. By the mid-90s, the homeless population had skyrocketed, and the technical revolution had transformed the economy, creating a radically stratified society. This was accompanied by a string of natural disasters, caused by overexploitation of natural resources by large corporations. To try and stave off economic and political disaster, the US government covertly manipulated the American and European stock markets, which ended up leading to the world stock market crash of '94, after it became public. This sent the US into a major depression, overwhelming the country with even more homelessness, unemployment, riots, and general chaos ruling everywhere. Many city governments declared bankruptcy or collapsed. That same year, among all that unrest, both the president and vice president were assassinated, allegedly by the NSA, one of the cornerstones of the Gang of Four, a powerful lobby comprised of the U.S. intelligence community and wealthy industrialists. In response, the Secretary of Defense declared martial law and suspended the Constitution, and the U.S. officially transferred power to an emergency interim military government. The new military government found itself at odds against the FBI, CIA, NSA, and DEA, which had acted with impunity for decades with secretive black ops and black budgets. A covert game of cat and mouse would ensue over the coming years that would greatly damage the intelligence community and U.S. military standing across the globe. 1999 saw the end of martial law. However, military rule continued. A sense of order would not be restored until the early 21st century. During this time, the turmoil increased as the natural disasters intensified following a total environmental collapse, which caused crop failures, acid rain, and dust storms. Massive firestorms raged over the northwestern US, destroying millions of acres of farm and grassland, and the wasting plague hit America and Europe. Among all of this chaos and government corruption, big corporations started taking advantage to gain more power, economically and culturally. The Arasaka Corporation, the large Japanese conglomerate, started buying out many small bankrupting companies, as well as offering thousands of Americans jobs within the United States. Arasaka heavily invested in its American branch, and it was also one of the first megacorps to invest in Richard Knight's vision of the perfect city, which was eventually named Knight City in his honor. Saburo Arasaka became known as the man of the people, someone who stood up for the people of the United States when the government failed them. The Second Central American War, which lasted from 2003 to 2010, was a total disaster for the United States, resulting in a renewed power struggle and an army counter-coup. Military forces surrounded Washington, D.C., fighting remnants of the Gang of Four. However, elements of the gang were not completely eliminated until years later, despite the fact that, by that time, large parts of the gang had already sold out to corporations. This further weakened the central government and exacerbated the already existing turmoil. Individual states began to break away from the country's main body. Local state governments were fed up with Washington, D.C. bureaucrats' ineffective and dictatorial actions, as well as the Gang of Four's exposed machinations. The first was California, then Texas, Oregon, Washington, and finally North and South Dakota. These new free states established their own laws and trade agreements, and they no longer sent their collected taxes to Washington, D.C. During this time, many cities and towns were abandoned, which also marked the emergence of nomads, a new American social class of migrants in search of jobs, water, and an escape from political turmoil. The vulnerability of these new free states also created the opportunity for megacorps to gain additional power and influence by investing into these newly emerging nations. This ascend in corporate power continued into the 2020s and would only halt due to the consequences of the Fourth Corporate War, which was a global conflict that took place in the early 2020s. The conflict started when two aquacorps, Sino and OTEC, started fighting over control of a third company. A year of fighting resulted in a standoff, with neither megacorp able to defeat the other. As a result, both corporations escalated the conflict by hiring forces from much larger security megacorps to provide themselves with the necessary militaries and resources to conduct open warfare. Militech, a US-based armaments manufacturer and security force, was hired by OTEC. In response, Sino hired the Arasaka Corporation, which was based in Japan. As this conflict escalated into open warfare on a global level, international trade routes were hit hard, and trade paralyzed, leading the countries of the world to start becoming weary of corporate influence, the conflicts that it brought, and leading them to start nationalizing corporate holdings. This culminated in late 2022, when the governments of Southern California, the Republic of Texas, and some European countries nationalized all Arasaka and Militech facilities within their borders. Not long after, the Arasaka Towers in Night City, which were Arasaka's last headquarters in America, were destroyed by a tactical nuclear weapon. It took decades to recover from the Fourth Corporate War. In its aftermath, President Elizabeth Kress, an ex-president of Militech, declared martial law, leading to national elections being suspended for decades and her becoming, in effect, a dictator in all but name. Kress instituted many reforms, nationalized assets of Militech, and brought many former Militech executives into the newly reformed Department of Defense. Similar nationalizations of corporate assets occurred across the globe. The new United States of the mid-21st century was similar to what it had been in the late 19th century, with the federal government controlling the civilized East Coast. West of the Mississippi River was the Wild West, and running from Seattle to Mexico was an unincorporated West Coast. The Pacifica Confederation was a loose union formed after the Fourth Corporate War by Northern California, British Columbia, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. These territories were, for all intents and purposes, on their own, hiring mercenary armies or local militias to keep the peace. Within their territory were several major U.S. military bases with permanent leases, but which exercised little control over the locals. During this period, the Pacifica Confederation was busy rebuilding its infrastructure. Night City itself managed to survive as a free city-state during this time by juggling the different interests of the new United States, the Pacifica Confederation, and the different megacorps, functioning as a free trade zone for them. This interim period lasted until 2069 and the start of the Unification War, sometimes referred to as the Metal Wars, due to the high tech that was used. This was an armed conflict between the new United States and a loose alliance of separatist states, known as the Free States. These included Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, Montana, Arizona, Nevada, and Northern California. The war started when the newly elected new United States President, Rosalind Myers, presented a unification program to extend federal rule over the rogue free states under the pretense of strengthening the nation. Most of the independent states opposed unification, leading the new United States to declare war on the loose alliance of states that were opposed to unification, and who were clandestinely supported by Arasaka. Night City barely escaped the fighting, with Northern California and Southern California being on opposing sides, the former being against unification and the latter for it. This was only achieved because Councilman Lucius Rhine pleaded the Arasaka Corporation for protection. At the dawn of an impending invasion of Night City, Arasaka arrived in time with a supercarrier in Coronado Bay, forcing the new United States and Militech troops to retreat. Following Arasaka's intervention, the new United States and the Free States signed a treaty known as the Treaty of Unification, ending the Unification War. The treaty ensured the Free States would remain autonomous, but would have to participate in the new federal government, and hostilities amongst themselves would have to cease. President Myers agreed to this treaty because she feared Arasaka's increasing involvement could escalate the conflict into one the new United States could not afford. While the Free States preserved their independence, in the aftermath of the war, both the new United States and Arasaka were left with more influence in the independent states than they had before the conflict had started. Night City itself was able to remain a free city-state, free from the laws and governance of the new United States and Northern California. This, however, came at the price of a significant increase in influence of the megacorps helmed by Arasaka, who, in 2070, built their new headquarters in Night City. As of 2077, relations between the new United States and the Free States have only further deteriorated. Suicide bombings in new United States bases in New Mexico and Oklahoma, which President Myers blamed on the still independent Republic of Texas, have led to retaliatory strikes on airports in Texan cities, causing both sides to start preparing for a potential border war. Arasaka has returned to North America, but their influence is still limited to the Free States and Night City. President Myers, a former CEO of Militech, is still in control of the country, which makes many Americans uneasy, given Militech's power and influence. In Night City, which became an independent city-state after the Unification War, tensions are high. Positioned between the militarily powerful North California and pro-NUSA South California, Night City tries to maintain a policy of neutrality, but has been increasingly divided between pro-independence and pro-New United States factions. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the history of the new United States of America and the world of cyberpunk. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos on similar topics. We'll see you in the next one.